A very good morning to you. We're live from London. You're with Monocle on Sunday with me, Emma Nelson. Coming up today, my guests, Daniella, Peled and Charles Hecker will share their views on the week's biggest stories. Daniella, good morning. What have you found?
Good morning. Well, if we just jump in at the fun end, I think we're going to be talking about donkeys later.
We will. We'll also be talking about the Israel-Hamas peace
accord. We can start with...
Charles, what have you found?
Well, on that very topic, we're going to look at how Western papers are grudgingly and teeth-grindingly slowly giving President Donald Trump a little bit of credit for what's happening in the Middle East.
Thank you for that. We look forward to it. We'll also get the latest headlines from Istanbul.
I'm Hannah Lucinda Smith in Istanbul, and coming up, why scores of pop stars have been arrested on drugs charges in Turkey, the role Ankara has played in the Gaza ceasefire, and why Morrissey has been cancelled in Turkey.
Plus, we'll be heading to Tokyo to hear from our editorial director, Tyler Brûlé. It's the 12th of October, 2025. Live from London, this is Monocle on Sunday.
Live from London, this is Monocle on Sunday with Emma Nelson.
Good morning to everybody. Good afternoon, wherever you are listening. A very warm welcome to Monocle on Sunday. Joining me around the desk, Charles Hecker, Russia analyst and author. Welcome, Chuck. Good to have you back. And Daniella Peled, very well known around the other outlets of Monocle Radio. But this is a first time for you on Monocle on Sunday. Managing editor of the Institute for War and Peace Reporting. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
How's your week been?
Well, it's been very busy. There's been, as usual, a lot of war, but actually, remarkably, perhaps something approaching peace, of which more later.
Absolutely. And how about you, Charles? You've been talking about investing.
That's right. We did a little bit of a webinar earlier this week online for a group of university students in the United States, talking a little bit about business, a little bit about Russia, and how at the very moment the two do not mix.
Okay, thank you. We might be going back to that in a little bit later. First, though, let's head to Tokyo. Our editorial director, Tyler Brûlé, is standing by. A very good afternoon to you, Tyler. It's just coming up to, it's just gone 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So is it nearly sundowner time?
It is indeed. It's. I'm just in front of the palace in Tokyo, Emma. Yeah, the day has drifted. It is early eve. It is that time of year. Japan does not. They don't really observe, let's say, the traditional changing of clocks like elsewhere in the world. So Japan, or Japan in general, actually just generally gets dark no matter what time of year. Anywhere between sort of 5 and 6 o'clock in the evening. So, yes, night is falling already here.
Lovely. So you'll take us for a little walk about where you are. I can tell you're outside and you're on the move. So what can you see for us?
So I can see, of course, the towers of Marunouchi. Anyone who comes to Japan, you'll know that this is this great sort of wall of buildings that are in front of Tokyo Palace. And this is part of the city which is largely owned by Mitsubishi. It's Mitsubishi's estate, really, right in front of the palace. And it seems that every time you come to Tokyo, one of your sort of the buildings that you love from sort of the 60s or the 70s, it's gone. It might have been just, a lovely sort of 20-story tower, and it's being replaced by something else. And so I'm just looking at, a lot of cranes as well on a Sunday. It's also a long weekend here in Japan as well. So tomorrow is a holiday. So the city is actually probably buzzier than usual, just a lot of families out, not to mention, of course, a lot of tourists.
And the tourism story has been bubbling along for quite a long time insofar as Japan is having to deal with an inordinate amount of people coming in. How possible is it to find just a little bit of peace?
It is possible. I'm not sure if it's possible, though, for certain tourists to find peace here, because I think this world of, maybe where people expect the same level of service, and of course Japan is very good at service, but that everything should be the same, that I should be treated the same way I am in London as much as I might be in Los Angeles. That still jars with people, and I do feel there's a bit of a pushback happening, and I say this in terms of finding sanctuary. I was very happy to go to a bar with some colleagues and former colleagues last night in the Shinjuku district. And actually, one of my colleagues, we've been there many, many times, and he said, actually, I'm going to go in first, he said, because I'm quite convinced if you walk in as a Westerner, it's just going to be fully booked. And of course, we went in, it was completely empty, and we then sort of engaged in a conversation. And they're not really open for Westerners. This is nothing new in Japan, but I can see that there's even a greater pushback against the idea of having a bunch of loud Kiwis or Brits or Americans not understanding the codes of also going out and singing on a Saturday evening.
Why?
And there are many, Emma.
But yes, I wonder whether you're part of them. I suspect you might be. How wise an idea is this for Japan? Because yes, you can understand why you would want to play it very, very carefully if you're Japanese. But at the same time, to just have a flat no if you're not Japanese is rather an abrupt and brusque way of going about things.
Well, as I said, this is nothing new. I think that this is, and look, you can slice this many ways. So some will say, if they're sort of really sort of waving the polite flag for Japan, they'll say, well, of course, they don't want to speak out of turn. They don't want to, of course, look on the back foot because maybe their English isn't perfect, whatever it may be. So it's just better to say no. The other side, if you sort of will accept that Japan is maybe not the most tolerant country in the world, they're just not interested. They're not interested in having Western customers who are going to upset their regular customers, who are going to, I think I come back to that idea of codes and behaviors, people who are just not going to behave the way that people might have been behaving in that bar for decades before. And so it's just a flat coming in, that's all there is to it. Don't care what you post on any social media channel, because also we're not interested in those either.
Tyler, your column this week involves quite a lot of self-examination when it comes to self-care, doesn't it? Should we start off in Tokyo?
Start off in that bar.
Off in the bar. But before that, you'd gone for a haircut.
I'd gone for a haircut, but this came off the back of actually having a conversation with someone who is a specialist in the world of longevity. And of course, perhaps understanding what are the best diets, where are the best places to live, how one should conduct their life. Anyway, we were talking about schedules, etc. I told him mine for the upcoming week, and he really frowned. He said, this is not good. He said, this is going to take its toll on you, etc., etc. And of course, this is not exactly news, but he wasn't buying it. And no matter how much I said, look, I believe I do all of the right things. I function reasonably well, etc. He was like, no, you really should not travel, with the caveat, but hey, if it makes you happy, go for it. So anyway, off I went to Hong Kong. Here I am in Tokyo. But and this is what I took away from that conversation, which was, okay, moderation, get lots of sleep, et cetera, but what makes you happy. And we have a place around the corner from us. It's our local shop down from the bureau, and it is just the most magical place. Emma, it's part community center. There is just this incredible, there's always an incredible soundtrack, because I don't know how many singles Tatsuro Yamashita did in his time, but listeners, that is the gentleman who famously wrote Christmas Eve, which of course is one of Monocle's anthems of that season. So you've got that playing. There's videos of surf scenes from Kamakura playing. And then there's just a legion of young and old men who are just looking. There's massages going on. Their ears being cleaned. There's shaving. There's tinting. And it's just, and then as I said, also you might have some grandpa in there who needs help going to the bathroom. Then 3 young guys will go help him with his Zimmer frame, go to the bathroom. And it's just completely life-giving. So anyway, that is my tonic for longevity. Let's see if it works.
A good haircut. Now, I told Charles Hecker, who's sitting next to me in London, that we were going to talk about haircuts in Japan. And Charles's eyes just lit up. I mean, dare I say, may I be polite enough to say that you don't actually need to regularly go to a barber anymore, Charles. But you suddenly went, oh my goodness, the Tokyo haircut.
The days of regular haircuts, regrettably, are well in the past. But there was a moment when I did have to get my hair regularly trimmed, and I enjoyed the enormous pleasure of getting my hair cut by a Japanese stylist in the center of London. And it was an unparalleled experience, not just in terms of the quality of the haircut, but the overall experience from the moment you walk in the door. You're walking into a little slice of Tokyo in central London till the moment that you leave. You are pampered. You are treated, like royalty. You get the most profound scalp massage during the process. I mean, honestly, I would go there even not getting a haircut, but those days are in the past.
Tyler, does this ring bells with you where you are?
Charles, scalp massage. I got my calves done by some new Panasonic robot. Emma, you would love this thing. You're not sure if you put logs in it or you put your rooms in it, but this sort of gets fitted around the back of your legs. And a couple of these sort of roving around the salon. And of course, as they whip one person out of the chair, then the Panasonic calf massager comes out. So anyway, listen, scalps, calves, everyone's welcome.
Brilliant. Thank you. And are you going to stop getting on aeroplanes?
Not anytime soon. I will be heading back to anchor this show in Zurich next Sunday, Emma. So it's amazing. It's an incredible run of Tokyo. Actually, when I was in the salon yesterday, they were like, tell us how long are you here for? I was like, normally I'm here for 48 hours, 3 days max. I said, I'm here for another week. I'm going, of course, which means I've got to go and do another visit at Cut Salon Ban before I leave next week. But I will be in the anchor chair, but in Zurich next week, Emma.
We can't wait. Could you bring us some calf massages? Because I think we could strap them underneath the radio table, and whether you're standing or seated, we could find ourselves in a most relaxed place. But they're always quite surprising, those things, those devices, aren't they?
Well, yeah, because you think they're going to be a bit of a letdown. They're not going to reach the right place or whatever it is. But they do. And I think, I was always very skeptical of them. But listen, all for it. There might be massage chairs inbound for Christmas. You never know.
Cannot wait. Tyler Brûlé, standing relaxed in Tokyo. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good evening there. It's 9:12 here in London. You're listening to Monocle on Sunday. That reminded me, Daniella, I don't know if you ever go when you go to the massage chairs in places. Have you experienced a massage chair in places where things that appear to be made of, I don't know, sort of like metal balls inside a chair, and you press a button and suddenly you find your body being attacked.
It is
by
really.
Your chair.
It's a pummeling, really. It's like a poking and a pummeling. I wouldn't say I've ever had a good experience with one of those.
No, I haven't had it. Have you noticed these, Charles?
They always seem to hit you in the wrong place.
Yes.
Either you're too big for the chair or too small for the chair, or the settings are wrong. But it's not lots of fun.
And if someone's grabbing your feet or your hands or whatever it is, and you feel as if your poor body is being beaten up in various different places. Faces are being pulled in the room, everybody. Let's talk about the news. It is something which was a monumental week when it comes to the history and the future of the Middle East. Daniella, you said about the fact that you talked about war very easily, but peace is something harder, and that is the great problem, isn't it? It is all too easy to start a war, but the peace is the absolutely intractable problem.
Yeah, and I'm being somewhat flippant about this because this is a ceasefire. This is not a peace deal. This is not a comprehensive. This is not a comprehensive arrangement. I wrote a piece for the Observer this week about exactly this, and pointing out that there are 20 points to this peace plan, and right at the bottom, there's a few lines about a future political and sustainable peaceful solution. But that's right. I mean, that shows you the priority that the sort of longevity is being given to this. There's lots of technical issues, there's lots of infrastructure issues, there's lots of geopolitical issues, but when it comes down to actually sustainable self-determination, no one is really paying that much attention.
And when it comes to reporting on the tone of this, the fact that the first thing that you said there was this is a ceasefire, not a peace deal. I wonder whether a lot of the world and a lot of the world's media has overlooked this part, because the fact that a ceasefire has been achieved is huge.
Yeah, certainly. It was a war that nothing has really been. Well, things have been achieved in geopolitical sense, of which more later. But for human beings, it was. I mean, basically the ceasefire deal, the return of hostages and exchange of prisoners could have been done a year ago, even before then. You know, the writing was on, on the table as soon as the attacks of October 7th. But I think there's not only there's international fatigue with this. People want to see an end to the return to the status quo would suit everyone, really, apart from the Palestinians.
You mentioned there the fact that you'd written something for The Observer, and you talked about the fact that it is hard to overstate the importance of the hostages, living or dead. The fact that there is a moment now which has been defined that tomorrow, Monday, is when the hostages, both living and dead, should be returned. That will be a momentous moment for Israel?
No, absolutely. And I think it is hard to appreciate the level of focus on the hostages, on the atrocities of October 7th and then the hostages. And they're familiar. They're like members of families for many Israelis. So really the focus is absolutely on the return of the hostages. And the war is hugely unpopular within Israel, but it's less about the humanitarian impact on Palestinians, because the Israeli media, with some few and honourable exceptions, really hasn't covered that. It's not unusual in a war that your media will cover your own perspective, but there's been very little sort of curiosity about that from the media. In Israel, amongst the Jewish public anyway, the Israeli army is absolutely the most trusted institution. So they tend to believe, if they say, well, there were tunnels under this hospital, that's why we had to destroy it, the public tends to believe it. But it's unpopular because they feel let down by the government. They feel that the hostages being returned is the priority. And certainly the credit for this ceasefire deal is not being given to Netanyahu. It's all in the hands of Trump.
Well, this is something that we wanted to talk about, isn't it, Chuck? The fact is that the Western media is having to navigate its response to Donald Trump playing an incredibly important role in this. I mean, do we know exactly what he did? It is being reported that he exerted the ultimate pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu. What do we think that means?
I think that means a significant break in previous White House approaches towards Netanyahu and towards Israel. I think one of the other big breaks, and I think one of the other reasons why this worked, in addition to the pressure put on the prime minister, is that there is, in the Middle East and I think elsewhere, the impression, and I'll overstate this a tiny bit for dramatic effect, but that there's somebody who's fairly trigger happy in the White House, and he issues muscular military threats that people pay attention to, because every time he blows an alleged Venezuelan drug boat out of the water, people take note. And his attacks on Iran, people take note. And so this is a president who is backing up words with firepower, and I think that's changed things.
And the fact that the way that this has been reported is that the international media, at least, has had to, dare I suggest, grudgingly accept the role of Donald Trump in all this.
Right. What you see in the coverage, both in the news, I think, if you read between the lines, and certainly on the opinion pages of newspapers that separate those two functions, is a sort of... a certain resignation in giving President Trump credit for being one of the drivers of the ceasefire. The dichotomy between what he's doing internationally and what he's doing domestically in the United States could not be more dramatic. And I think that's what people are finding difficult to reconcile in the columns and around newspapers, both here in the UK and in the United States. It's you can just feel it, and I guess what's made this more difficult was President Trump's sort of word salad, which most of us have learned to ignore, about the Nobel Prize. And if you took that away, it might have been a little bit easier to digest all of this. But he's made such a stink about the Nobel Prize and not winning it that it's made it even more difficult to be clear-eyed on what he's done and not done. With respect to the Middle East.
Indeed, it's the motives that let's not question the motives, but let's actually look at the result.
Yeah.
And Daniella, bringing you, I mean, the scenes in Hostages Square yesterday in Tel Aviv were incredible. Tens of thousands of people were there. Clearly, this moment of relief had descended upon them. But the people giving the speeches was Steve Witkoff, the US envoy to Israel, to the Middle East. There was Jared Kushner, former US envoy to the Middle East, and then Ivanka Trump on the stage. And when Witkoff praised Donald Trump, there were huge cheers. But then when he mentioned the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, there were boos.
Yeah, absolutely. He's very unpopular. concept, the perception, I think, internationally as well, is that he's prolonged this war just to keep himself in power. Nonetheless, there are going to be elections in Israel. It could be as soon as next March or April, and he will have to face a reckoning for it. I mean, the media coverage in Israel, as I said, there's been very little self-scrutiny, and certainly no one is thinking in great depth about reconstruction of Gaza. This is not a matter of great discussion. I mean, the focus on sort of the centrist right-wing media has been things like, how can we prove public diplomacy? We're not telling our story well enough. This is an ongoing issue in Israel. And also, how are we going to have security guarantees from Gaza? We need to retain military independence so we can act if there's a rocket coming over. We need to scrutinise every bit of aid coming in. But there are also calls for a real reckoning about what happened, the intelligence failures that let October 7th happen, and there's no guarantee. We might think, if Netanyahu is not the next prime minister, then things may take a more sort of reasonable centrist turn. But there's absolutely no guarantee of that at all.
Where could Israeli politics go from here? Because the far right clearly sees this ceasefire as a personal defeat and bloody nose for them and is furious about it.
Look, the far right has been given immense political power by Netanyahu and his current government, unprecedented political power. They don't necessarily represent the consensus of Israeli public opinion, but when this is how politics works. When extremism becomes more tolerated and more acceptable, then the window shifts. And I think, if by Western European standards, the idea of an Israeli centrist government would not be what we imagine. I mean, look, I was saying to you earlier before we came on air that the Israeli Minister for Diaspora Affairs and Combating Anti-Semitism has invited Tommy Robinson to come and visit Israel this week as soon as he finishes his latest trial. I mean, this is
Tommy Robinson being the
far right, far right activist, seen really in the UK as a bully boy. He organised, he's largely credited with the riots of last year, and he organised a huge far right rally here in September, which was addressed by Elon Musk, not one of his chums. And although Britain is again surging towards the right, the Reform Party is gaining in popularity, there is a difference between somebody with a string of criminal convictions who really is seen as quite a violent thug, and being honoured by a member of the Israeli government, and Amichai Chikli, the diaspora minister, doesn't represent a particularly extremist faction. So I think going forward, I don't see any sort of sunlit uphill lands of people, politicians talking about building a two-state solution. Israel is, like any trauma-affected society, is looking for its self-interest and its self-defense, and it doesn't see that still doesn't see any idea of a Palestinian partner for peace.
And the fact remaining here is, just looking at Haaretz this morning, the Israeli newspaper says, analysis, a message to far-right Minister Smotrich. Trump has spoken, the war in Gaza is over. It says the end of the war means that Israel's method to date, apply military force to solve negotiating issues, has run its course. The fact is that the external world, in Israel at this point, is being told, actually, it's Donald Trump who stopped all this. That must smart. Who wants to have a go at that? Daniella first?
Well, I think it's this is it. It's Israelis are seeing a strong man who sort of pushed through action, which is something that they admire. But it's also Donald Trump's approach to peace deals is quite transactional. It's easy to understand and it makes sense. Israel is looking at regional stability. The peace deal, normalization with Saudi Arabia is like the big prize that will change everything. Since the consensus in Israel amongst most political circles is there is no solution for the Israel-Palestine question. We just need to live with it. We just need to contain it. We need to focus on economic prosperity. So that transaction.
You don't look quite convinced by that when you say it.
Well, no. I mean, I think about another peace plan that Trump is credited with pushing through, the one between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and that again is very transactional. It looks at international cooperation, it looks at infrastructure, it looks at business. So it makes a lot of sense to the people who will benefit for it. But it's what's not built into it is any person-to-person reconciliation. You have these conflict-affected, highly traumatized societies, but there is nothing in that deal about cultural exchange, about reconciliation, about transitional justice. And that approach, it looks good when you start, and I'm not decrying it. It has a lot of benefits, but without that human element, and as I said, in the 20-point peace plan, there's not a great amount of it.
Sorry, Charles, carry on.
No, I was just going to say, I think the world is going to have to start getting used to very rapidly the idea of a triumphant Trump, that's a mouthful, on the world stage, because he is taking credit for this, and he is, in Trumpian fashion, borderline gloating about it. And even though he said from the Oval Office, the world has come together around this idea, what he's really saying is the world has come together around my idea. And as we mentioned at the beginning of the broadcast, let's not overlook the fact that it was his family on the podium, his daughter, his son-in-law, and then his appointed Middle East envoy sort of welcoming the ceasefire. What this has done to Trump, I think, is going to turbocharge him, mostly on the foreign policy front, but additionally domestically.
The one thing he's had to row back on, though, is the Riviera idea. That is now gone. But we do have this image now. We do have this situation in Gaza where I think I read somewhere it's like 83% of all structures in Gaza City have been damaged. Crops, vegetation, the ability for that piece of land on earth to actually survive has been absolutely diminished to the point of where people begin. And the one thing that Trump was talking about was investment from the private sector, or how Gaza is going to be rebuilt. I mean, from someone who specialises in this kind of thing, what is happening now? Where are we looking?
Well, precisely. This is his lingua franca. And not only is he a president who is transactional, but he's a president who has traditionally been transactional in real estate. And Kushner's presence is not accidental. Look, he knows all of the key players in the Middle East, and I'm sure he had some sort of, role in bringing them all together. In the aftermath of all of this, where there are further transactions to be executed in redevelopment. And you're right, Gaza's been laid to waste, and refugees returning from the south to the north to what they thought might be a place to live and some shelter found nothing. There will be rebuilding. It would be naive of us to assume that there won't be some sort of participation of the Trump entourage in the reconstruction of Gaza.
And what are the feelings out there, Daniella, about who is actually going to go and rebuild this place?
Well, it's being sold as a business opportunity, and if you look at who's behind the peace plan, we have Qatar, we have Turkey, we have the Sharm el Sheikh summit this week is going to be held in Egypt. This is very clear in how the regional papers and media are reporting this. Everyone is scrambling to say, well, it was us what done it. Well, look, we're going to be there. Well, we played an important role. The Gaza war has been utterly, utterly devastating for the Palestinians. But in terms of the wider Middle East, what Israel's actions have been quite useful in a geopolitical sense. The almost complete sort of attack on Hezbollah, for instance. Hezbollah is weakened. The war with Iran. So, as the Palestinians have for decades and decades said, the Middle East and the Arab countries, they hold them up as a symbol of unity, and we should fight for their rights. But actually, when it comes down to it, they're just pieces on a political chessboard.
Let's bring in Hannah Lucinda Smith, conveniently, because she joins us on the line from Istanbul now. Hannah, very good afternoon, or very good morning to you, I should say.
Good morning.
And just what Daniella was saying, the people, those behind the peace deal, Qatar, Turkey, obviously where you are, it was a huge event, wasn't it? Because the Turkish envoy was a key player in pressurising Hamas to come to the table.
Yeah, I mean, a huge event, both politically and socially, as I'm sure you can imagine, overwhelmingly the public opinion here in Turkey is sympathetic to the Palestinians. And there's a political element as well, because President Erdogan, not just recently, for more than a decade, has really worked hard to present himself as a kind of protector of the Palestinians. He's really got himself involved in the Israel-Palestine conflict. And as you say, yes, it was Ibrahim Kalin, the head of intelligence here in Turkey, flying to Egypt last week, late at night, to meet with Hamas leaders. That was really sort of one of the final pushes to get this ceasefire deal through. And of course, that's been reported very, very heavily here in Turkey in the news here.
And yeah, you've been covering this for a very, very long time as our Istanbul correspondent. The fact is that were you surprised, or what was the level of reaction to the fact that Turkey played such a key role in this?
I don't think it's a huge surprise at all. Since Donald Trump's come back into power, let's not forget, during Donald Trump's first term, there was this sort of quite rocky relationship that he had with President Erdogan. I don't know if you remember, at one point, he even sent him this letter, which was sort of immediately made public, where he's saying, don't be a fool, let's make a deal. But really, the relations have been very, very good since Donald Trump returned to the White House. Really, Erdogan is the kind of leader that Trump understands and can work with. As one of your previous guests was saying, these kind of deals are so transactional. Erdogan also is a master of transactional politics. He's very, very good at, doing U-turns, even on things that seem to be a deep point of principle a few months ago. Turning around on those in order to do these transactional deals. So I think there's very, very little surprise that Erdogan and Turkey have been really heavily involved in this.
And what Daniella has just said, Daniella Peled from the Institute of War and Peace Reporting, I don't think you've met. One day you should. The idea of the Palestinians being a sort of a unifying group across the Middle East, is that still the case?
I don't think so. I mean, there's two really interesting places. One, of course, is Turkey, which I know really well. Now, although, as I said before, the weight of public feeling is, very much with the Palestinians. The kind of public shows of support for Palestinians come from one particular part of Turkish society, the very, very Islamist part, the part that would, traditionally be supporters of President Erdogan or, another very Islamist right-wing party. Really, the whole kind of narrative about support for Palestinians has been captured by that Islamist part of Turkish politics. And the people who are not part of that, and particularly leftists, in places like Britain, we see all kinds of different groups coming together to march for Palestine. You don't see that in Turkey because it is such a fault line through domestic politics as well.
I have to say, I was in Istanbul a few months ago, and it was very noticeable to me, actually. There were far fewer, depended the part of Istanbul you were in, but there were far fewer Palestinian flags and other symbols than you would see in London.
Yeah, absolutely. But if you go to certain neighbourhoods, you will see them everywhere. If you go to the more sort of conservative, more working class neighbourhoods, the places that are, the bedrocks of Erdogan's support, that's where you'll find it. And I think the other interesting country is Syria. For such a long time under Bashar al-Assad, he presented himself to his own people, to the Syrians, as their kind of bulwark against Israel. And really with his collapse, that narrative has collapsed as well. It was interesting when I was in Damascus in February for Monocle magazine and talking to Syrians about this. The overwhelming feeling from the Syrians I was talking to was like, we don't want conflict with Israel going on for decades more. It's our neighbour. It's always going to be our neighbour. We want to make peace. And I think, the Middle East has been so riven by this kind of, this war going on between Iran and the Sunni Muslim states, between, different groups within the Middle East. And they are just sick of always being the ones on the front line of these fault lines.
Daniella, let's bring you in again on this one. The fact that Israel, we talked about sort of no one really wants to annoy Israel, but the fact remains is that Israel has this astonishing bravery when it comes to deciding to launch missiles and to actually carry out military operations in other countries, Lebanon, Qatar a couple of weeks ago. It is that the fact that Israel does not follow a lot of the rules when it comes to deciding who to attack and on whose territory.
Yeah, I think bravery is a difficult word.
It's
a difficult, but certainly part of the whole Israeli raison d'etre and the whole military strategy is that we will not be reliant on other people, and we reserve the right to act, and we reserve the right to act in a way as a guerrilla force, even though they are one of the most powerful armies in the world. The Iran war worked out pretty well for Israel, and actually worked out pretty well for other countries in the region, but it could have been very different. And also there's the argument to make that Iran was in a prime place for negotiation, so you could have solved the issue a different way. But Israel believes that might is right, and action takes precedence over diplomacy. And again, this is going to have serious ramifications for Gaza, because the idea underpinning this is there's going to be an international force. Israel has very little to no trust in international supranational organisations. So it will be very interesting, if not tragic, to see how that works out.
Hannah, let's move to some of the other news that's making the headlines in Turkey. A lot of people were arrested last week on suspicion of drugs involvement, but there was other reasons as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was, I guess we can call it a bit of a shakedown. 19 pop stars, actors, social media influencers brought in to a police station on suspicion of drugs charges, forced to have a drugs test, which they're waiting on the results on, and release. Now, this, of course, made huge news across Turkey. These are incredibly well-known people. I think it's very, very interesting that, social media influencers were included in this group, because, Instagram is a huge thing, as is TikTok here in Turkey. This is not something that's happened in isolation. Turkey, since the start of this year, and particularly since the arrest of the Istanbul mayor, Ekrem İmamoğlu, has really become a harder and harder place to be any kind of opposition figure, or even a figure who is not sort of wholeheartedly in support of President Erdogan and his party. We're seeing people like journalists, writers being targeted. Of course, again, this isn't something new in Turkey, but it is certainly accelerating. And the feeling about the arrest of these various kind of, local stars in Turkey is that it's kind of a warning to others. This is, I think like anywhere, if you go into that world and you start drug testing people, it's not going to take long before you find something you can charge someone with. It's the same in Turkey as everywhere. And I think, by doing this, the authorities are saying to these people, we have our eye on you. Don't be saying anything. And we've seen this before. We saw it after the Gezi Park protests. There were many, many actors, singers, people from the arts involved in that and speaking out during those protests in support of the protests. And since then, they've either been forced into exile, or they've been arrested, or they've basically been silenced. And the actors who get the jobs in Erdogan's Turkey are the ones who very, very openly and full-throatedly give support to Erdogan.
Let's talk about a more international pop star, perhaps enjoying his moment of fame about 4 decades ago. But Morrissey is still doing the rounds, former singer of the Smiths. I'm sure he'd be very cross with me if I just described him as that. But the fact is that he's been trying to perform in Turkey and has had his gigs cancelled, not because of the quality of his music, but because of where he's performed before. Yeah,
absolutely. So another star cancelled for a different reason here in Turkey. So Morrissey was meant to be playing 2 gigs here on 15th and 16th of December in Ankara and and in Istanbul. In Turkey, like in many places in the world, Morrissey is, let's say, a complicated figure. He was such a kind of hero, a musical icon. So many people, and of course his political views in recent years, have really seen a lot of his fan base fall away. Now, that hasn't affected his popularity here in Turkey. What has affected it is the resurfacing of a video from 2012 of him playing a gig in Tel Aviv and holding an Israeli flag on stage and waving it. Now, this has resurfaced. It's not, the actual context of the concert is sort of not as important as the fact that it's surfaced at this moment where Israel is not a popular country politically or socially here in Turkey. And the way that it's been framed is, look, here's Morrissey supporting Israel. How can he come and play in our country? And his people haven't yet made a comment to confirm that he's been cancelled, but certainly the dates of these gigs have been removed from his website and they appear to have been cancelled.
Are we dealing, are we dealing a little bit with the Streisand effect here, Hannah, that perhaps the focus of Morrissey's appearance in Turkey would not have been so bright had he not had his concerts cancelled.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think this is a really classic case of when things like this, when something which probably would have stayed as like a storm in a TikTok teacup, that was also quite hard to say. Not many people would have heard about it, but it is in the government's interest here in Turkey to kind of inflate these kind of stories because it gets people wound up, right? You start talking about it and then you have commentators on TV talking about it and then it gets sort of blown up into this bigger thing when actually I don't think it's that much of an unusual thing to sort of, show some kind of appreciation or recognition of the country that you're playing if you're an artist. And certainly 2012 was a very, very different time. And this has really been, I didn't think I'd be in a position finding myself sort of supporting Morrissey politically anytime soon. But I do think this has been completely taken out of context and sort of bolstered for the needs of certain groups here in Turkey.
Indeed. Does anyone care about Morrissey in Turkey?
I think, it's like a lot of places. You've still got your sort of diehard fans like you have anywhere. I do think the sort of the broader controversies that he's stirred in recent years, which, a lot of them have been very sort of specific to England, right? He was talking about supporting Brexit and then talking about, too many immigrants and these kind of things. These are things that are very, easy to overlook in places like Turkey. So, he does have that support base. I'm not actually sure even whether this news is going to affect his support base here, because the people who are sharing it are not the people who are going to go to his gigs in Ankara or Istanbul. That's very, very clear. So, I don't think his support base will be massively harmed here in Turkey. That being said, how big is that support base? Probably not as big as he'd like to think.
Anna Lucinda Smith not waving her gladioli through the streets of Istanbul. Monocle's Istanbul correspondent. Thank you so much for joining us on the line. Joining me around the table, Charles Hecker and Daniella Peled. Charles, just listening to that, I mean, there's so many. There's a real sort of string. There's a thread being run through all this, which is something that we need to get your view on. Is that we talked about Syria, we talked about Gaza, and then we can talk about Ukraine as well. But the idea of that there are post-war locations which need rebuilding, and the idea of investment and who does this is the big question now, isn't it?
That's right. And I think, look, this talk that I gave earlier this week for an American university, where everyone is thinking and anticipating, and I suppose it's fair to use the word hoping, that Ukraine is soon the next post-conflict country for reconstruction. And there is a very eager contingent of European companies, German among, in the lead, but the Brits and the French and Italians and sort of the usual candidates not far behind, and Americans who are very, very eager to engage in the reconstruction of Ukraine. A lot has to happen. I mean, sorry, this is sort of stating the obvious and understating the obvious to say that a lot has to happen before that begins. But Ukraine will have a lot of similar features to other post-conflict areas. And I think, just using what Daniella was saying earlier, I mean, the notion of security guarantees on the ground, because whatever happens in Ukraine will initially come as a ceasefire and not a peace agreement. And unless there are very, very strong security guarantees for Ukraine, rebuilding there will be a dangerous proposition. And we still don't know, we meaning sort of the collective West, still doesn't really know what a security guarantee looks like. Does it involve boots on the ground? How much hardware does it involve? How much software does it involve? Daniella's sort of digesting what I'm saying in live. And that's just one of the things that you have to worry about when it comes to the future of rebuilding Ukraine.
The security guarantees are the huge issues here, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it affects us collectively in Europe. And I think there's been some struggle to understand this. There is some hope for, I have one good news story, which is the Moldovan elections, where Moldovans, despite huge amount of Russian interference, chose a pro-European path. So I think that's a point of light, and also really important, because as we carry on. There might be the end of active conflict in Ukraine, a ceasefire, but Russia's speciality is a hybrid war. This is disinformation. This is malign influence operations, vote buying. There's also an economic financial aspect to it as well. And I think Moldova is much more aware of this in a way than we are in the UK and in Western Europe.
And do we believe that the Europeans are going to become more aware of this and this need for security provision? Not least because we've seen, if you can close Munich airport overnight with drones, and the last time I looked, Munich was not near the Russian border. What does that say about a country's ability to both public and private sector to come together and ensure that the infrastructure and that the provision and protection is actually going to be there?
Yeah, ask anybody who was also trying to fly to Denmark in the immediate past. Look, I mean, if I get really wound up about this, I would like to, I think that...
Go on, please do.
Right. Everybody stand back. No, Europe is not, doesn't understand what's involved. I mean, I think Eastern Europe does. I think if you look at the voices coming in diplomacy from the Baltics and from Poland, that they're completely, resolute in understanding what has to happen. I think it's the rest of the continent and NATO and the European Union that really sort of push comes to shove doesn't know exactly what to do. I mean, I think if we were to see another set of drones or another set of missiles stray into Poland, Poland will shoot them down. If that were to happen in almost any other European country, and arguably the distance maybe augurs against that, but I don't know if other European countries would have the same level of resolve. If this happens again in Estonia, they're going to shoot that jet down. And that's they know what to do and they know what they want to do. I don't know if the rest of the continent does.
That's what I would think. The Turkish Turkish government shot down a Russian plane a few years ago. I think
that's right.
5 years ago. It didn't, and Russia didn't incur into its airspace again.
Well, I mean, we're talking about drones. I mean, that's another aspect of hybrid warfare. We're not talking about warplanes and dropping bombs, which perhaps is a bit easier to understand and easier to calibrate your response to. But for a hybrid attack, you need a hybrid response, and first of all, you need the awareness that this is what is happening, and that Russia is interfering not just in direct intellectual interference, but also has got quite a vested interest in promoting just anti-EU narratives, for instance. I mean, in Moldova, a lot of our work in Moldova was around this. And, you'd interview people farmers in agricultural areas. In Moldova is the poorest country in Europe. And they would say, well, if we join Europe, our children will have to be gay. And this is the kind of narrative that, that Russia is promoting. The destruction of the family, of sovereignty and so on. And, there are some very, very vulnerable audience to that, including in this country. I mean, a lot of the sort of horrific stuff you get on social media, fomenting division between communities and racist and sexist and transphobe, all of this stuff, a lot of it isn't real. A lot of it comes from Russia, and I think we have no idea. We're just completely oblivious to this.
Is business aware of this? Because I know that let's all go back to your book, Zero Sum. It's always good to give Charles a plug for his book, which is excellent, which charts the role of investment into, well, you can do it slightly better than I can because you wrote the thing. But what your book talked about whether people actually still have a future appetite for investing in Russia. And when you have what Daniella has just been talking about, where's the moral compass?
Well, so, this is stating the obvious, but Daniella is absolutely right. And, I particularly like when we talk about hybrid war, you'll recall that just, a few weeks ago, Fiona Hill, who is one of the world's best analysts of all things Russian, said that Russia's at war with the UK, and she was laughed out of the room by the papers. I think that they have been, that reaction to Professor Hill's comments have proven short-sighted because particularly, Russia's emphasis on hybrid war has put it on a war footing against the UK and has put it on war footing with the rest of Europe. What is surprising about all of this, to get back to your question, Emma, for which many, many thanks, is I was temporarily shocked at how robust the appetite is among Western businesses to go back to Russia. Because as soon as there was even a whiff of normalization in the air in Washington at the beginning of the second Trump presidency, when Trump and Putin were chit-chatting on the phone and secretaries of state were flying to Riyadh. Business people were getting their suitcases out from the cupboards and packing up and getting ready to go. I'm overstating it, but only slightly. We had a second flutter like that around Anchorage, which once again turned out to be premature. And I think everyone understands that there have been now already too many false dawns in the potential reconciliation between East and West, and the reconciliation between, Russia and the business community. I think that most Western companies have no idea what's waiting for them on the ground if and when they get back.
What is waiting for them on the ground?
Well, since the war has gone on much, much longer than anybody has anticipated, a few things have happened. And that is that Russian law has evolved in a way that makes the ground extremely inhospitable and unfertile for the return of Western business. Russian intellectual property law, just to name one, has been completely eviscerated. So anybody with a patent or anybody with a trademark or anybody with a brand is finding that brand and trademark and patent already violated and no way to defend it if it were to go back. And that's just one of the smallest things. The other thing is that the Russian business community is actually furious with the Europeans in particular for having left them at their moment of need. And since there was a split in the community between companies that left and companies that stayed, the companies that left Russia have been seen as traitors and as unreliable. And look, things change. But you have to wonder how warmly they'll be welcomed back if they want to come back.
The idea of people's memories are quite short, aren't they, Daniella, when it comes to international pariahs who suddenly become rather welcome and rather embraced back into the fold?
I mean, yeah, let's just look at the Eurovision Song Contest, shall we? As the arbiter of this. And, certainly we were talking about Israel earlier, and there's been a lot of noise about countries refusing to participate in the Eurovision if Israel is invited. And this has a huge effect on the ground in Israel. I mean, this is that people care about this a lot. There are very few avenues of soft power left these days, shall we say. But yeah, let's see. If Russia returns, was Russia in the Eurovision? It must have
absolutely
been.
Russia's won Eurovision and loves it.
Eurovision is big at Monocle. I think I perhaps not followed it as closely.
It's very big. And Putin had a go at having another Eurovision Song Contest, and the Vietnamese won.
That's right. He tried to replace Eurovision. The problem is that Eurovision in the Russian mentality and in the Russian pop industry is irreplaceable. And, even though they claim it's the biggest love-hate relationship, but really it's dominated by love and they miss it.
Let's move on. We've got about 5 more minutes left of Monocle on Sunday, and there's 2 stories I think would be nice to cover. We'll come to Daniella's donkeys in a moment. But first, tributes paid to Diane Keaton. In the last 24 hours, she's died. From a personal point of view, she's the woman who helped me discover trousers.
What a great shame. And gone far too soon. 79 seems premature these days. And how awfully sad. I mean, and here was an artist of boundless, universal talent who played serious roles, who played comic roles, who won an Oscar and just a wagon full of accolades and awards, and who, when you knew that she was in a movie, you knew that it would be a good movie. When you knew that she had a role, you knew that it would be a serious role and done by a professional. And, just epic defining, someone who I will, artistically, miss desperately.
Yeah, I absolutely take Emma's point about the trousers, because she defined herself in a unique way, especially for the span of her career from the 70s until now, really. And that's quite an achievement for a woman in Hollywood, really.
It was incredible. And she also, I think it was in Annie Hall that they tried to retrieve the lobster from out of the back of the fridge. I learned loads of things. Forgive me, film world, if I've got that wrong. I'm just thinking off the top of my head.
You're right.
But it's that lovely moment. And I think that I find quite sad about looking at Diane Keaton now is that the great films that made her so famous, like Manhattan and Annie Hall, became associated with Woody Allen, and they somehow took, I don't know, would you agree that reputation didn't do Diane Keaton's role any good, simply because she was associated with something which was so problematic?
I think, though, as an individual, she has a legacy far beyond that, because she was in so many hit movies aside from the sort of Woody Allen oeuvre.
All 3 Godfathers, wasn't she?
She was in The Godfather, First Wives Club, and Oh, God. Now, of course, saying that I'm one of her biggest fans, I can't remember everything off the top of my head now that the microphones are switched on. But
don't worry, the LA Times has done the top 10 films of Diane Keaton, and it doesn't tell you which ones are the favourite ones you choose.
Okay, good. Thank you for that, everybody. Please read the LA Times. But here's the thing. I think that she was able to rise above the Woody Allen noise because as an individual, she was just such a class act that she was irreproachable. I think in her artistic decisions, and I think that actually, when confronted, when the Woody Allen scandal sort of was at its greatest sort of flair, I think she was able to sort of somehow diplomatically say the right things at the right time, and has emerged largely untarnished. I really think so.
Finally, the 2.5 minutes that remain of Monocle on Sunday are to talk about how much money we give to donkeys. This is an article in the Sunday Times saying the donkey sanctuary is bequeathed so much, £40 million a year, that it's running out of space for plaques and plays classical music in the barns. Daniella.
This is the most British story ever. And in an era of rising nationalism and like bully boy tactics, this makes me very happy and very proud to be British.
I'm so glad you say that. Now, you have had not something bequeathed to you, but you've helped donkeys, haven't you, Charles?
Well, yes,
inadvertently.
Yes, but with great pleasure, of course. Long ago, I was once given a Christmas gift where somebody made a donation to the donkey sanctuary in my name, and I got a lovely certificate, and was quite happy. I think that donkeys get a bad reputation, and the more money they can make, the better.
Everyone loves donkeys.
Do they? Oh, good. Okay, I'm reassured.
It's lovely. I haven't thought that much about donkeys, but thank you for that. I mean, the idea of the fact that the British, or that we as a species, find it quite hard not to keep blowing each other up, and yet we can give endless amounts of funds to donkeys. It's perverse, isn't it?
I think it's a particularly British thing as well, because we don't tend to like children or young people. This money. No one is. The child welfare charities are not getting the same overwhelming amount of support. However, donkeys with their long fluffy ears and their like big eyes.
Yes, if you head down there, you'll meet Peanut and Maverick and Drizzle, which it's another one. But it is that thing that I think Daniella raises a really good point, that the threat from the elderly parent or grandparent is always, when you die if you don't behave, the money's all going to the Cats Protection League.
Empty threat, is it?
There appears to be leagues of potential inheritors who are behaving mischievously and having their fortunes diverted to the donkey sanctuary.
What are you leaving? Which animal are you leaving your gazillions to?
First of all, whatever's left to leave, I'm spending it all.
How about you, Daniella?
I think I'm going to choose naked mole rats. Because
yes, they've done really well this week.
Apparently,
they don't need your money. They're all right.
But if the future of the world looks like naked mole rats, which is quite unfortunate. But apparently, they have the secret to long life.
They do. There's something genetic.
So research. If I donate all my legacy to research into mole rats, then ultimately, could there be a greater gift?
We'll leave it there. That's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests, Daniella Peled, Charles Hecker, Hannah Lucinda Smith and Tyler Brûlé on the line from Tokyo. The programme was produced by Desiree Bandley, Mariella Bevan and myself, and our studio engineer was Mariella Bevan. I'm Emma Nelson. Monocle on Sunday is back next week, but until then, goodbye, thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of your weekend.